I've been trying to record this episode for the last couple days, and I've been having a hard time deciding what story I want to tell. I packed up the boat and left my slip December 21st, headed for St. Pete Beach with a possible stop in Port St. Joe. The first 3 days or so of the trip just went beautifully. The sailing was wonderful. The morning of the third day, I lost some of my rigging and it changed the course of things. But here's where the problem lies. I've been living in the first 3 days of the trip where I was just having a great time. The night I left, I motored out of Fort Walton Beach a few hours before sundown and sailed right out into the night, into the Gulf of Mexico. It was just a perfect night. The weather was cooperating, the sails were full, the sky was clear, the moon, it wasn't a full moon, but it was a big moon. I don't really know how I want to sum it up, but it was just a great evening. I sailed all through the night. The boat always throws a few little difficulties out there. I had to adjust the autopilot tensioner a little bit to keep it working. At one point, took the whole steering wheel off, but kind of got that put back together. For the most part, it was just peace and quiet, just the sound of the ocean beating up against the boat and the sails occasionally luffing in the wind. My course, as dictated by the wind, took me in more of a southern direction than I had wanted to go. So I considered modifying my plan to take me just straight to Naples, and I could anchor there and take a few days off until I met with a friend who was going to continue with me on from there. The first night out, I intended to stay awake most of the night. I really enjoy night sailing and figured I could do a little bit more napping when the sun was up. So I grabbed my 0 degree sleeping bag and drug it up into the cockpit, dressed warm in a hoodie, and just camped out on one of my benches all night long. The autopilot did most of the work, but I would correct every now and then and occasionally go trim the sails. For the most part, I stayed on the same tack all night long and into the next day. And after the sun came up, the wind shifted just a little bit, but stayed pretty consistent. I made myself some breakfast and a coffee. I learned something about my coffee preparation. I love my routines. I mean, I may not come across as a person who cares much about routine because I change so many things about my entire life all the time. But my little micro routines throughout my day kind of keep me sane. And one of those is how I make my coffee. Use an AeroPress. I have a little hand grinder. A little zipper pouch was made by a friend of mine in Antarctica. She didn't make it for me. She made it and I bought it from her. It's my little comfort, my little safety blanket that comes with me everywhere I go. Now, trying to make coffee in an AeroPress on a sailboat that's heeled over, bouncing in waves, it can be done, and I did it. But I'm finding that there is more of a need to streamline things like making coffee, food, when I'm operating, when I'm single handing a sailboat, than there would be in other facets of my life. So I will be getting, amongst other things, to get the boat back on the road, we'll be definitely getting an espresso coffee pod machine thingy for future use instead of my AeroPress on the boat. And that will become my new routine. Or something else will become my new routine, but not something that's unmanageable and gets way between me and having a morning coffee. I didn't mind the cold. It was dry and it was sunny, and that's good enough for me. The second night was also clear and not quite as cold as the first night. It's still a great time to be above deck, just looking up at the stars, camped out on that same bench. I always nap on the low side of whichever way I'm heeled over, so that I just kind of roll into the backrest of the bench and don't roll into the cockpit. I had wondered what I would do to entertain myself on, these long trips alone for days at a time. And, I came up with plans and I brought like colored pencils and sketch pads and adult coloring books and things like that and books to read. And it turns out I didn't really, not yet, I didn't need any of it. I was just entertained with sailing and being on the boat. Sometimes just being able to do nothing because there was nothing to do and I didn't have to go looking for something to do. If I waited long enough, something would find me. And eventually it did. 3 days in, The weather hadn't really gotten much rougher. The seas had gotten a little bit higher, but it was making pretty slow time, really, about 3.5, 4 knots. And sitting up on deck, just kind of looking out over the sails and over the ocean, I don't really recall what I saw. All I know is it involved the entire forestay, furling system, and jib of my boat just simultaneously falling apart. I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about it or really thinking like, I don't know if I could have prevented it or spotted it sooner. And at this point, I don't even care. I handled the situation, as best as I could. For losing the forestay, 150 miles from land, I managed to not lose my mast, got everything under control. And I think the rest of it is a story that I'm going to tell another time. The boat's back home. It was time consuming and a bit of an ordeal to get it back here, but she got back here under her own power. I had a great time moving her. Once I settled into the idea that I could actually rely on this motor, we weren't going to have problems. I motored for about 6 hours every day, anchored early, and just enjoyed the peace and quiet of being anchored out in the bay or in a little cove, cooking dinner, sitting up on deck reading a book, or laying around below deck reading a book, or napping. There was a lot of napping and sleeping going on. I really do enjoy being on the boat, even when, I guess, a situation like this where I'm headed back for repairs, plans have changed. I'm just full of excitement. It didn't knock the wind out of any of my sails. I'm looking at it as an opportunity to make the boat a little bit newer, a little bit stronger. I'm going to have new sails next time I take her out. I'm going to have some new rigging. There's a lot of lessons I think I picked up in, maybe streamlining things a little bit so that I can find the things I need quicker or closer. In the meantime, I didn't want to give up my travel plans. I definitely get married to ideas, even though my original intention was to arrive by sea. As plans go, I just bought myself a plane ticket. So I'll still be going to Honduras. I grew up around Spanish speakers. I lived in Miami for a little while as a kid. I never did all that well in Spanish class in junior high and high school, although I did take it throughout junior high and high school, and I took Spanish again in college. The only time I did well at it was when I worked in restaurants that had Spanish speaking staff in the kitchen. I didn't really have had a little exposure of it over the last few years, a few trips to Mexico and whatnot, but not really much. A couple springs ago, when I was in Spain for a month, I found that I picked up a functional, a real basic, like where's the bathroom, ordering food, what I want in my coffee kind of, language, but it was still enough to be helpful and way better than I did in France. I've been excited about going just somewhere in Central America, and I didn't really care where, and just taking Spanish for a month every day. Immersive, at least that's what it's called. So I'm going to go do it and see how it goes. I know it takes more than a month to learn a language. It takes a lifetime, probably a couple lifetimes for me. I'm hoping to hang around that part of the world for a little while. I want to invest the time in, hopefully blending in a little bit better and making my life a smidge easier. So the work never ends, whether something's broken on the boat or not, or whether I'm in the slip here or headed somewhere else. Like everything is still one foot in front of the other, and I'm still moving forward. I'm surprised to have gone from, the notion of learning how to sail and buying a boat to where I am now, which is having, this obsession, I guess, or this thing that has taken over my life, that it's just a hunk of fiberglass. I'm very into it, even though I'm going to take a break to travel, and then I'm going to have to go to work this summer and make money to do all this stuff. Time will always pass faster than I wish it would. So I'm not really worried about having to wait. I'll have the parts, I'll make the repair, and when the boat's ready, I'll get back on it. In the meantime, while we're all anxiously awaiting Capella's repairs, I will be sure and take the GoPro and any of my other goodies with me wherever I go, and try to collect interesting video and tidbits along the way, and continue to share stories, since Sailing Capella has been about a lot of things, also including Sailing Capella up to this point. I don't really see any reason not to continue with sailing Capella, even if it's another 6 months of watching me cook weird food and talking about ultra running or whatever. Keep coming back. Thanks for listening.